disobey, but she flew down from the peaks of Mount Ida. Do you know how fast she flew? You know when there's a guy who's been many places, and in his head he can quickly go here or there as he remembers many things. That's how fast now Hera flew, until she arrived at high Olympus, where all the gods were seated. And when they saw her, they stood up and greeted her with their cups. But Hera would not accept any of their cups, except for Themis. Themis was the first to come over to her, and Themis spoke to the white-armed Hera. Hera, why have you come here? You look like someone who is scared. Did the son of Kronos, your husband, scare you? And the white-armed lady, Hera, answered her and said, Themis, don't even speak to me about these things. You know how that god's heart is hard and arrogant. You just go and make the divine feast, the fair share feast for all of the gods. And then I will come and tell you everything. And I don't think that everyone will be happy. Not every mortal, not every god, not even someone who's really having a good time at the feast. That's what she said. And then Hera went and sat down on her golden throne. And all of the gods in Zeus's house were very upset. Hera sat there and she smiled with her lips. But everything on her forehead above her dark brows showed no joy at all. And full of anger, she said to all of them, Fools! We are fools when we rage against Zeus. You know that as much as we want to stop him, we are less than him. We are less in both words and in force. He just sits over there by himself. He thinks himself so separate from us, so much stronger than us, so much more powerful. And soon his shit will rain down on all of us. I'm surprised that Ares hasn't already felt his pain, since Ares' favorite human son, Ascalaphos, has already died in the battle, the one that huge Ares always said was his. That's what Hera said. And mighty Ares, he slapped both of his huge thighs with his palms and said, Now, none of you gods who hold your homes on Mount Olympus can resent me if I go down to avenge my son's slaughter. Even if it does mean that my fate is to be struck down by Zeus's lightning and then just lie there in the dust and in the blood with all the corpses. That's what he said. And Ares, right away, he got fear and terror to yoke his horses. And Ares himself put on the shining bronze armor. And now there would have been another, even more savage round of Zeus's anger on all of the gods, except that Athena darted out of her seat and ran over, because she was scared for all the gods, ran over and grabbed her brother. And she said to him, Have you lost your mind? You know, it's like your ears can hear, but you're brain dead. Hera has just come here. Didn't you hear what she said? Just come here from Olympian Zeus. And now, what? You have suffered so much already, and you want to be forced back to Olympus as well? You know that Zeus, he will leave behind the hardy Trojans, he will leave behind these Argives, and he will come back here and plant shit seeds for the rest of all of us. As he picks us up one by one and decides who's guilty and who's not. So Ares, I beg you, let go of your anger for your son. There is already a man who is better in his strength and with his hands who has died since, and there will be another one who will die soon. It is too difficult for us to defend all of our human children. That's what she said, and she took the huge bronze helmet off his head, and she stripped the shield off his shoulders and took the heavy spear out of his hand, and she forced him to sit down again. And now Hera, she got out of her golden throne, and she called to Apollo outside of Zeus's house, and Iris, who is the messenger of all the gods. And she said to them as they stood next to her, and her words flew, Zeus now orders you to go as quickly as you can to him. So go there. And as soon as you see him face to face, make sure that you listen to everything that he says and orders you to do. That's what she said. And Hera once again sat down in her golden throne. But these two, they flew. They flew all the way to the peaks of Mount Ida with many springs. Mount Ida, which is the mother of the beast. And there they found Zeus. Zeus up on the Gargarine peak. And Zeus was not unhappy to see them because it meant that they had quickly obeyed his wife's commands. And so first he spoke to Iris, and his words flew. Iris, go now quickly down to Lord Poseidon. And I want you to tell him this whole message and don't lie. Now, tell him to stop fighting, to get out of the war. He either needs to go back into the race of the gods or into the shining sea. And if he will not listen to my words, if he chooses to ignore me, well then remind him that as powerful as he is, he cannot stand up against me, not in any boldness, because I am much stronger in my force, and I am older. And even if his heart decides that he can call himself equal, all the other gods hate him. That's what he said. And fast, wing-footed Iris did not disobey, but she darted down from the peaks of Mount Ida, and she flew. She flew like when there's snow or hail that flies out of the clouds, and it comes ripping down on the airborne north wind. That's how she flew, until she came to holy Iliad, and she found the earth-encircling earth shaker Poseidon. And she stood next to him, and her words flew. Earth-encircling earth shaker Poseidon. So I've got a message from Zeus, the Aegis bearer. He says you got to stop the fighting and get out of the war. You either have to go back among the races of the gods or into the shining sea. And if you don't listen to his words, well, then he threatens that he is going to come down here himself. And he is going to stand up against you and face you with his own hands. And you should avoid his hands. That's what he says. And even if your heart does say that you can call yourself equal to him, well, all the other gods actually fear him. And the earth-shaking, earth-encircler Poseidon said, "Oh, Papoi! You know, Zeus is awesome, but this is too much. We are supposed to have equal honor. Equal honor, and now he's trying to force me to do something against my will? Look, there are 3 brothers that are the sons of Kronos and Rhea. There's Zeus, there's me, and there's Hades, who rules everything underneath. Okay, so we divided things up 3 ways, equal. I got the gray sea, which is where I live all the time. I like it. Zeus got the sky, the wide heaven, all the clouds, all the air. Hades got the murky darkness under there. Okay? But Earth and Great Olympus, they are shared. We share them. So now Zeus doesn't even think about me. You know, why can't he just sit over there and enjoy his fair third portion of things? You know, I'm not going to listen to him. I'm not. You tell him, no! And windy, fast-footed Iris was like, okay, so this is the speech, this hard, terrible speech is what you want me to go back and tell Zeus? Maybe you could just change it a little bit? Because, you know, awesome people change their minds all the time. And also you should remember that the Furies are always on the side of the person who's older. That's Zeus. And Poseidon, the earth encircling earth shaker, was like, oh, Iris, what you said is true. You know, and it's pretty awesome for a messenger to have a big picture of what's right. But it still just makes me so mad and so sad when I think about my equal honor and him treating me like this with these terrible insults, with these mean words. And I really don't like that he threatened me with his hands. I mean, like, trying to scare me. He should save that for his kids, for his daughters and his sons, all the kids he has that would actually have to listen to him. I'm so pissed off. But you know what? I'm gonna let it go. I'm gonna let this go. But I will say this, and I want you to throw it in your thoughts. That if Zeus decides to go against me, and the pirate Athena, and Hera, and Hermes, and the Lord Hephaestus, he goes against all of us and decides to spare Troy, not to sack holy Ilion, not to give the great glory to the Achaeans, well, that will be an anger that will never die. That's what he said. And he left the Achaean people, and he just sank back into the sea. And all the Achaean heroes, well, they were sad to see him go. Meanwhile, cloud-gathering Zeus spoke to Phoebus Apollo, who is still standing here all this time. Phoebus Apollo, go now down to Hector, the son of Priam. Breathe battle fury back into him, because now, just now, the Lord Poseidon has jumped back into the sea and avoided the anger of my hands. That's good, because that's a fight that all the gods would have heard about, even the ones down below around Kronos. But it's better for him, it's better for me, it's better for everybody. Not, you know, I mean, there would have been a lot of sweat in the fights that we would have had. Come on. But now I want you to go down, and I want you to take this terrible tasseled aegis and carry it in your hands and scare all of the Argives. And I want you yourself to take care of Hector, the son of Priam. Once again, breathe the battle fury into him so that he can drive the Argives back against their ships. Once they get back to their ships and they reach the Hellespont, well, leave the rest to me. I'll decide in word and in action what happens next. That's what he said. And Phoebus Apollo did not listen to his dad. Right away, he swept down from the peaks of Mount Ida. He swept down like a dove-killing hawk, which is actually the fastest of all things that have wings. And he found Hector. Hector, now who was not still laying down. No, now he was sitting up. Now he could actually recognize the people around him, his buddies, and his breathing was a little easier now. Now some of the pain had stopped because Zeus's mind had breathed some new battle fury into him. And Phoebus Apollo came and stood next to him and said, "Hector, son of Priam, why are you sitting over here apart from all the others, being all weak? Did you get in some trouble?" And Hector, with his shining helmet, looked straight at him and said, "Now who out of all of the gods are you that I'm looking face to face with? I mean, didn't you see it back when I was fighting and killing a bunch of men around the Argive ships, and then Telamonian Ajax hit me with a giant rock in my chest? You know, I really thought that it was going to be this day that I would be down in Hades hanging out with all the corpses. I really thought that I had breathed out my last breath." That's what he said, and Phoebus Apollo now answered Hector and said, "Buck up! Don't you know what kind of avenger the son of Kronos has sent you down from Mount Ida? Phoebus Apollo, with a golden sword. That's me, motherfuckers. And I have saved you many times before, and I have saved your whole city too. So now I want you to get all of the cavalry and get them ready and stir them up against the Argive ships, and I am going to smooth a path in front of you and scare the Argives away." That's what he said. And he breathed great battle fury back into Hector. And now Hector, he stood up. He was like when there's a really well-fed horse that's in the manger and it's just standing there, but then all of a sudden it breaks free of all of its reins and it goes running to the place where it really likes to take baths the best. And it holds its head high and all of its mane goes darting around its shoulders, and it's prancing and galloping and having a great time because it goes to all of the favorite horsey places. That's how Hector was now, as he drove the Trojans. But on the other side, how were the Danaans like? Well, bear with me a minute. Because they were like a group of dogs or of hunters that are chasing after either a horned deer or a wild goat. Choose your own adventure. And that prey all of a sudden escapes around either a high cliff or through a shady wood. So everyone realizes that today is just not their day to make a catch. And then all of a sudden, a huge lion with a great beard shows up right in their path. And as much as these hunters and or dogs wanted to catch the first thing, now they have to run away. That's what the Danaans were like. Because they were always following after and stabbing with their swords and with their spears and trying to get to the Trojans, but then all of a sudden they see Hector. Hector is among the ranks of men, and they're scared. And their hearts just fall out by their feet as they run. But then it's Thoas, who is the son of Andraimon. He is a leader of the Aetolians, and let me tell you, he is awesome with the spear. And he's pretty good in hand-to-hand combat too. And there are really few Achaeans that can beat him in the assembly. That's where the young men have contests. And now, with every good intention, Thoas addresses the Argives. "Oh, Popoi, what is this? What the hell is this that I see? Hector! He's up! Again! He has avoided death!" I'm sure that all of us hoped, thought, prayed that Telamonian Ajax had actually killed him. Now it's clear that there's some god driving him. He couldn't rage in front like this otherwise. So, I want you all to listen to me, okay? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to send all of our crowd back to the Achaean ships, And all of us who call ourselves the best, we are going to stand fast in the front lines. We are going to hold our shields and hold up our spears. And I think that even Hector, even as much as he is raging, he will not have the guts to come against our Achaean crowd. That's what he said, and all of the Argives, they listened. Now they all gathered around Ajax and Lord Idomeneus and Teucros and Meriones and Meges, who was like Ares the war god. All of these who turned now to storm against the Trojans and Hector. And on the other side, Hector led the Trojans. He led them with his huge steps. And in front of him went Phoebus Apollo. Phoebus Apollo, who was holding the aegis. The terrible tasseled aegis that was made of bronze, and Hephaestus had made it and given it to Zeus so that he could scare men with it. Now the Argives, they held fast, but it was a battle cry that came up from both sides. Now there were arrows flying from the strings on both sides. Now there were spears being thrown everywhere, and some of them fixed right into the flesh of vigorous young men, and some of them, as much as they wanted to taste the flesh, they ended up just stuck in the dirt. As long as Phoebus Apollo just held the aegis still, then the arrows and the spears flew and men fell. But when Phoebus Apollo began to shake the aegis, that is when the Argives were sent into flight. Now it was when, like, there are two wild beasts that come against a herd of cows or a herd of sheep in the dead of night when there's no shepherd or no cowboys there to save them. That's what it was like now with the Argives running away and Apollo giving glory to the Trojans. And so it was here that men died. First it was Hector. He killed Stichius and Arcesilaus. Now Stichius, he was a leader of the bronze-clad Boeotians, and Arcesilaus, well, he was one of Mecistius's buddies, and then it was Aeneas. Now Aeneas, he killed Medon and Iasos. Medon was the bastard son of Oileus. You remember him? Yep. Brother of Ajax, and he had gone far from Philaki because he had killed his stepmother, Areopagus' brother. We remember. That's right, she was married to Oileus. Well, now he's dead. And Iasos, well, Iasos was one of the leaders of the Athenians. Polydamas, he killed Mecistius. Polites, he killed Echios. Brilliant Agenor, he killed Polonius. And then it was Paris. Paris, actually, he got Deicus. Got him with an arrow through the back of the shoulder as he was running away to the front lines, and that went straight through. So now they were stripping the armor. They were stripping the armor, and the Argives, they were running. They were running through the stakes, through the ditch. They were pouring back into the ships. And that's when Hector, with his shining helmet, he called out to all the Trojans. Attack the ships! Leave the armor. Now if there's any man that I see going the other direction from the ships, I myself will plan his death. And there will not be any kinsman or kinswoman that will put his dead body on the pyre. Instead, the dogs will drag you away in front of our city. That's what he said. And he took his whip and whipped from his shoulder so that his horses jumped forward, and all the cavalry came behind him. And now Apollo came, and Apollo kicked down all of the banks of the high trench. And he created a big path in the middle, piling it high. Now this path was so wide and so big, it was the distance of a spear throw. But when a man is really, really trying to throw that spear, puts his weight behind it, that's how big this is. And now all of the Trojans and their cavalry come streaming across the path. And then Poseidon, Apollo, he comes and destroys the Achaean wall. He destroys it like, you know when there's a kid and he's like on the beach? Tofu. You know when there's a kid and he's on the beach and he's playing in the sand and he builds something, right? But then he's still playing and he just destroys it with his hands and with his feet. That's how easily now Apollo destroyed the Achaean wall, all of their work, all of their hardship. So now the Trojans ran. And the Danaans, they held fast back against the ships. They were calling out to one another. They were calling to the gods. They were all lifting up their hands. Oh, superstar. Thank you. And it was especially Nestor, the son of Neleus. Now he put his hands all the way up to the starry heaven and said, just like that, Zeus, Father, if there was ever some Achaean, some Argive who back in Argos, where there is much wheat, either burned a fat thigh of a sheep or of a pig and asked to make it home safe, and you said yes, and you nodded your head, then please remember that now. Now, defend us, Olympian, from our day of death, and do not let us be beaten down by the Trojans. That's what he said. And Zeus heard Granian Nestor praying, and he thundered in response to his prayer. But the Trojans, when the Trojans heard the thunder, they got even more full of battle fury. Now the Trojans, they just rushed even more. Now they were like, they were like when there is a wave on the wide crossed sea, and all of a sudden the waves get bigger and bigger, pushed by the strength of the wind, and they pour over the walls of a boat. That's how the Trojans were now, as they poured through the walls of the Achaeans. And they were fighting with their spears, and they were fighting from their chariots. And the Achaeans were now up on their ships. They were fighting with huge pikes, these giant long spears that lay in their prows and were always ready for sea battles. And while the Argives and the Trojans were fighting like this, and the huge battle cry had emerged, well, what about Patroclus? Well, Patroclus, he was still just hanging out in Eurypylus' tent. He was pleasuring Eurypylus with stories, and he was putting a good cure on his wounds. And then all of a sudden, Patroclus saw the Trojans pouring through the Achaean wall, and he said to Eurypylus, "Oh shit, Eurypylus, I can't just hang out here with you anymore, even though you need me." Now the Danaans are in trouble, and the Trojans have poured through the wall, so now your sidekick is going to have to take care of you, because I'm going to have to run over to Achilles and see if I can get Achilles to fight. And maybe Achilles Meanwhile, now the Argives and the Trojans were coming back against each other, and there was a huge battle cry that arose. Now, the Argives were not able to push the Trojans back away from their ships, even though there were fewer Trojans. And the Trojans, they were not able to actually break through the Argives enough so that they could mix in with their tents and with their ships. So now the battle, it was like when there's a measuring stick or a level, right? And it's being used by a guy who's a builder. He really knows what he's doing, okay? Athena has given him special skills. That's how perfectly balanced now the battle was. And even though there was fighting happening everywhere, all along the ships, most of the fighting was where Hector was rushing against Ajax, around Ajax's ship. And here too, there was nothing that could decide them, right? Ajax could not push back Hector and drive him away because Hector was being driven by a god. And Hector, he couldn't get rid of Ajax and set fire to his ship. But Ajax did kill. Ugh. That's right. This guy, Calator, Clytius' son, he was a Trojan. He was running up on the ships. He was carrying a torch in his hand, getting ready to set fire to it, but Ajax stabbed him straight through. So he fell, and the torch fell out of his hand. And right away, Hector, he called out to the Trojans when he saw it. Except I'm going this way. Trojans! Trojans! Don't you see now that Calator has died? Be men! Remember your furious courage. Now we have to save his body. He has fallen beside the Achaean ships. And he stirred up the courage in each of them. And he aimed his shining spear at Ajax. But he missed. Instead, he hit Lycophron. Now, Lycophron was the son of Mastor, and Lycophron, he had actually come and lived in Ajax's house, like the big Ajax, I think. Because he had killed a guy back in Holy Kythera. He was Cytherian. So he was a special sidekick to Ajax. And now Hector's spear, well, Hector's spear went straight through the ear, through the top of the head, and he fell with a thud. Yep. And Ajax, when Ajax saw, he called out to his brother, Teucros, man, they killed Master's son. You know, he grew up with, he was in our house. We treated him like family. So where the hell are your fast fate arrows now and that bow that Phoebus Apollo gave you? And Teucer, he comes running over right away with his bent back bow and his newly twisted string and his quiver full of arrows. And he takes aim. And he kills, well, it's Polydamas' friend. Clytus. Thank you. He kills Clytus. Now, Clytus was actually holding Polydamas' chariot. He was his charioteer. He was holding the reins. He was controlling the horses. And let me tell you, he'd actually done a great job. He had led all of the Trojans in the charge. He had delighted Hector and all the Trojans, but now there was no one around him to defend him because Teucer's arrow went straight through his neck. And he fell out of the chariot. And Polydamas, who was his buddy and the Lord, he came running right over. He was the first the first of anyone to get to his horses, and he grabbed the horses and grabbed the chariot, and he took the horses and gave them to Astynous and ordered him to just look after those horses and hold them well, while Polydamas ran back into the front lines. But Teucer got another arrow ready. Now he was aiming at shining Hector, but he missed. Zeus was protecting Hector. Zeus now broke Teucer's well-strung bow and actually made the bow fall out of his hands. And when Teucer saw this, he just kind of shuddered and called out to Ajax, his brother, "Oh, Popoi, man, some god is messing with my bow and arrow, because they just broke my new twisted string. I just put this on this morning. I mean, I had planned on shooting a lot of arrows today." And Telamonian Ajax answered him and was like, "Oh, Pepon, if some god messed up your bow and arrow, just let them lie down there. Go and grab a big spear and a shield and a helmet and come back here and fight. Now we have to remember our battle lust." That's what he said, and Teucer did not disobey, but right away he ran and he put his bow and arrow back into his tent, and he grabbed the long shadow spear, and he put the strong helmet on his powerful head, and he grabbed the shield, and he ran straight back to Hector. And Hector now, what does he say?
Trojans.
I'm still gonna crap all over me. And Hector now called out to the Trojans and the Lycians. Trojans, Lycians, and Dardanian spear fighters, now I need you to remember your furious courage and attack the hollow ships, because I have seen with my own eyes that Teucer's arrows are all messed up and he's their best man. You know, it's pretty easy to recognize when there's a god who's either giving glory and making things better for men, or making their battle fury very, very small and choosing not to defend them. Well, now Zeus has made the Argives' battle fury very, very small, and he's giving the kudos to us. So I say we all get together and attack the ships. And if there's anybody who gets hit or gets struck, and it's his turn, his fate to die, well then let him die. There's no shame in dying. Not what it means that your child, your wife, your land, your house will remain unhurt afterwards. Whenever these sons of the Achaeans leave and go back to their own country. That's what he said. And he stirred up the Trojans even more. And now Ajax on the other side, he yelled out to the Argives, "Shame! You Argives! Now is the moment. Now is exactly when we either live or die." Hector, don't you hear him? Don't you hear him stirring up his men to set fire to our ships? What do you think? They're going to set fire to our ships and you're just going to walk out of here safely back home? He does not invite you to dance. He invites you to fight. Now there's only one thing to do, one plan, and that is to fight in close quarters with everything you've got. Because it is better in one single moment to either live or die than it is to be squeezed slowly like this by men that are worse than us. That's what he said. And now he threw battle fury back into the Argives. So now Hector, he killed Skedios, and he was one of the leaders of the Phocians, and then it was Ajax, he killed Laodamas, and then it was Polydamas, he killed Calenian Otis. He was one of the son of Phyleus' best friends, that's Meges. And Meges saw and darted over, and he tried to get Polydamas, but Polydamas jumped out of the way, and instead, well, he killed Croismos, got him in the chest with his spear as he ran forward. And then Dolops came. Now Dolops, he was the son of Lampos, and Lampos, who was bred to be one of the strongest sons of Laomedon, and he was really good with the spear, Dolops was. And he rushed at Meges. He rushed at Meges and he stabbed him in the middle of his shield with his spear. But Meges was wearing a very thick breastplate. Now, let me tell you about this breastplate. Meges' dad, Phyleus, had gotten this breastplate from a place called Ephyra that was by the river Selais, because this guy Euphetes had given it to him as a guest friend gift so that it would always protect him from enemies in the hateful battle. But now it protected his son, Meges. So now Meges stabbed back at Dolops, stabbing the very top of his horse-plumed bronze helmet with his spear. And that horse plume, it was dyed all purple. Well, it broke completely off and fell to the ground. But Dolops lived! And he thought he could still win this fight. But then, warlike Menelaus came in secret and stood next to him and stabbed him. So that was the end of Dolops. He fell with a thud, and darkness covered over both of his eyes. And now Menelaus and Meges together, they ran forward and they stripped his armor. And Hector, he called out to all of his brothers, but especially to Melanippus. Now, Melanippus, this was a guy, he had just liked shepherding back in Percote before the enemies came. But when those sons of the Achaeans came on their well-oared ships, that's when Melanippus came to Troy. He was the son of Hicetaon, but he moved into Troy, made himself preeminent. Priam basically adopted him, honored him with the rest of his kids. And so now Hector told off Melanippus. Melanippus, what the hell are we doing here? Doesn't it make your stomach churn to see our cousin Dolops killed like this? Now, look, don't you see now these two men that are stripping his armor? You have to remember your battle fury. Now there is no more time. We can't fight the Argives from far off. We have to get up in their faces. That's what Hector said, and he led, and the other followed. And Ajax, on the other side, as the Trojans rushed, he called out once again to the Argives, "Friends, now I need you to remember your sense of respect and or shame. Because more men live when they have respect and or shame in relation to one another. And I especially need you to remember that courage and glory do not follow after anyone who runs away." That's what he said. and he threw courage into each man's chest. And it was now that warlike Menelaus came and stood next to Antilochus, and he said, Antilochus, you know, I don't think there's any other Achaean here who is younger than you or faster than you, and you know, you're pretty awesome with the spear in close combat, so I think that you should go charging forward, and I'm pretty sure you can hit a Trojan. That's what Menelaus said as he backed away slowly. But Antilochus, he went rushing forward. He went rushing forward with his spear now, and he was aiming it at all of the Trojans, and the Trojans actually backed away when they saw him aiming with their spear. And his spear, it didn't go in vain. Because who did it hit? Melanippus. Aww. Straight in the chest as he ran furiously forward. So he died. He fell with a thud, and the darkness covered his eyes. And then Antilochus, he rushed forward. He was like a dog now. He was like a dog that rushes on the body of a dead deer that has been flushed out of its lair and then hit by a hunter. That's how Antilochus now rushed to strip the armor off of Melanippus. But Hector saw, and Hector came running back towards Antilochus, and now Antilochus, he was like a wild beast that had done something wrong. You know, when there's like a wild beast who has killed a dog, and he really doesn't want to wait around for that crowd of men and hunting dogs to come after him, and so he runs back. That's now how Nestor's son Antilochus ran, and the Trojans and Hector followed after him, but Antilochus got back to the ships, and he took a stand as he dove back into the safety of all of his buddies. But now the Trojans, they were like raw meat-eating lions. Now they were carrying out Zeus's commands, and the Danaans, they were completely denied any kudos. Zeus stirred up the Trojans. Zeus wanted to give the honor to Hector, the son of Priam, so that Hector would go and set divine fire to the ships. And then, with that, Zeus could fulfill his promise that he made to Thetis. And from that point on, he would send the Trojans back again away from the ships, and once again, he would give all of the kudos to the Achaeans. So that's why now the genius Zeus sat and waited to see the light of the fire from the ships that were burning. And now he came and gave glory to Hector. He found Hector, the son of Priam. He was already raging, but now Zeus made him rage. Now he was raging like spear-shaking Ares. Now he was raging like the fire that eats through the woods as it goes through the glens of the mountains. Now Hector's mouth began to foam, and his eyes, they flashed like lightning beneath his bristling brows. And Zeus stood in the air above him as a defender. Zeus only gave the honor to Hector and gave him the kudos, because Hector was not long for this world. Already, Pallas Athena was leading Hector's death day towards him at the hands of Peleus' son, Achilles. Thank you all so much for coming, as usual. We want to thank Bar de Pen and our amazing bartender, Onion. Alex Martalogu, saving my ass. Sam Windholz on the video. And this week's director, Martin Law. Please come back again next week. We're being directed by Julie Tamiko Manning, and good shit's gonna come. It's just gonna keep getting better and better from here on out. Thank you so much again for coming.